I'm Victoria, a woman in my early 40s. Life has taught me to be invisible, to stay in the background. It's not that I wanted to be unnoticed, it's just how things played out. I was always the one who faded into the periphery while others shone in the spotlight. Growing up, I watched my brothers, each one more talented and more capable than the last, receiving all the attention and praise from our parents, especially our father. My older brother, Andrew, was the athlete, the one who could throw a baseball across the field with ease, the one who was always at the top of his class. My younger brother, Ethan, was the intellectual, the kid who could build robots out of scrap metal and solve math problems that had the adults scratching their heads. And then there was me, quiet, introverted, a little clumsy, not particularly good at anything, but always trying. My father, a man who held high expectations, always made it clear that I wasn't as capable as my brothers. You need to try harder. Victoria, he would say, maybe if you focused more, you'd be more like your brothers. It wasn't harsh, just a fact. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But it stung. They were the golden children, the ones whose futures were already mapped out in my father's eyes. As for me, I was just the afterthought. I was the girl who didn't fit the mold. And I learned quickly that it wasn't worth fighting for attention when there were already shining stars in the family. By the time I left for college, I had learned how to live in the shadows. I wasn't going to be the head of a big company or the world's next great inventor. And I knew that. But what I thought I could do was love well, support well, and make sure everyone else had what they needed. It was my way of finding my place in a world where I felt irrelevant. I met Mark while I was finishing my degree. He was everything I wasn't: charismatic, outgoing, confident. He could walk into a room and have everyone's attention within seconds. He had big dreams, and I admired that about him. He had a vision of starting his own business. And even though I wasn't sure what that would look like, I was there for him. I was always there, cheering him on, holding things together when his startup faltered, and celebrating every victory, no matter how small. But somewhere along the way, I started to lose myself. At first, I was proud to be a part of his journey. His success felt like mine, too. But as he grew more successful, something inside of me shifted. I couldn't pinpoint when it happened exactly, but I started to feel invisible again. Mark was so busy, so focused on his work, that I didn't matter as much anymore. I became the background noise to his grand symphony. I was still there, of course, handling the household, making sure things ran smoothly, but I started to wonder, when was it my turn to be seen? My position in life, in our marriage, began to feel like a mere footnote to his story. While I supported him, I realized that no one was supporting me. It was as though I was just a reflection of his dreams, an accessory to his success, but not someone who had her own. I started questioning my worth, my role, and if there was more to me than the role I played for him. But I never voiced those doubts after all. How could I? He was the star, and I was just the one holding the spotlight. Or at least, that's how it felt. Now, looking back, I can see it clearer than I had spent so much of my life in the shadows, either in the backdrop of my family or in the periphery of my marriage, that I didn't even know how to step into the light. I had no idea what it would look like to be seen for who I really was. In the end, I was left wondering, was I just a shadow? Or was there more to me than anyone, including myself, had ever realized? The moment everything shifted for me came in the most unexpected of places: my brother's wedding. It was meant to be a joyous occasion, a celebration of love, family, and the beginning of a new chapter for him. But for me, it was the day my own worth was laid bare in front of everyone. Andrew, my older brother, was getting married to a woman named Claire. She was stunning, model-like, with perfect blonde hair and a smile that could light up a room. The type of woman who seemed to have it all. Andrew had always been the golden child of our family, so it was no surprise when he started dating someone equally impressive. The wedding was extravagant, held at one of the most luxurious venues in town, the kind of place where the chandeliers alone probably cost more than my entire apartment. There were about 300 guests, all well-dressed, all from affluent backgrounds, all seemingly perfect. I was invited, of course, but never truly made to feel like I was part of the main event. The whole thing felt like a parade of perfection, one where I had been placed on the sidelines, more as an accessory to the family than an important participant. The reception was a lavish affair, complete with a 5-course meal, an open bar, and an $80 floral arrangement that covered every inch of the venue. It was ostentatious in the most predictable way. But then came the moment that shattered me. During the speeches, Claire stood up with Andrew by her side. The guests were all gathered around, glasses of champagne in hand, laughing and celebrating. I watched from my seat at the back, feeling a little out of place, as if I wasn't truly part of this world. Claire's voice rang clear over the microphone as she began to speak about her gratitude for her new life, her excitement for the future, and her joy at being surrounded by her loved ones. And then, she looked directly at me. "Of course," she said, smiling with that flawless grin. "We couldn't have had the wedding without the help of my new family, and especially Andrew's sister, Victoria, who's been so kind to help with the planning and details. She's always been there in the background." I blinked, unsure if I had heard correctly. Always been there in the background. Those words hit me like a slap. Everyone in the room turned toward me, their smiles wide, their eyes expectant, waiting for me to acknowledge the compliment she had just given. The laughter seemed to go on a beat too long, and my cheeks burned. I could feel all of their eyes on me. My heart sank into my stomach. It wasn't a compliment, it was an insult. A public reminder that I was always just a shadow, someone who was there to help, to serve, to stay in the background. I had spent months helping Claire organize this event, taking care of every detail, from the guest list to the favors, but here she was, acknowledging me as nothing more than an afterthought, and doing it in front of everyone. The most painful part was that my family didn't say a word. No one stood up to defend me. No one noticed that I had been humiliated in front of hundreds of people. Andrew, standing beside Claire, smiled proudly, his arm around her waist, unaware or maybe uncaring of how much it hurt me. That was when I started to truly understand my place in this family. In this world, I wasn't the bright, beautiful sister who could command attention. I wasn't the one who could walk into a room and have everyone look at me. I was the one who made sure everything ran smoothly for everyone else. And that was it. I was just a support system, a background figure that no one ever truly acknowledged. But the humiliation didn't end there. The next day, after the wedding, my father called me into his office. The rest of the family was still at the reception, but my father insisted on talking privately. I sat across from him, wondering what was so urgent. He looked at me with an expression that I had seen so many times before, one of disappointment, as though I had let him down once again. "Victoria," he began, his voice cold, "I need you to understand something. You're a great helper, but that's where your value lies. You've always been the one who takes care of others, never the one who gets credit for it. It's time you accepted that." His words felt like ice running through my veins. For so long, I had lived to please him, to make him proud, but at that moment, I realized that I would never be anything more than a caretaker in his eyes. He didn't see me as someone capable of greatness, someone deserving of recognition. He saw me as someone to be used, someone who could be relied upon to handle the dirty work, the work that no one else wanted to do. And that's when I truly understood. It wasn't just Claire who saw me as invisible. It was my entire family. I wasn't a person to them. I was a function, a role to be played when necessary. The final blow came later that evening when Mark, my husband, looked at me with distant eyes, his words colder than ever. "You know, I thought you'd enjoy the wedding more," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. But I guess you're just not cut out for that kind of life. Just a little too tired. Tired. That word cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't just about being physically exhausted from all the work. It was about being worn down by years of being overlooked, ignored, and treated as less than. I didn't need to hear it from Mark. I had heard it from everyone else long ago. But that night, as I stood alone in the hallway of the hotel, the reality set in. I had spent my whole life in the background, and I was tired of it. I was tired of being someone else's shadow. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of the unraveling. The moment the wedding was over, and the polite smiles faded into the night, I could feel it, the crushing weight of everything that had happened. It wasn't just that I had been humiliated. It was the stark realization that my entire life had been spent bending, adjusting, and contorting myself to fit the needs and expectations of others. And for what? To be invisible, to be the person who was always second, always the afterthought. My stomach twisted, and the tears that had been building up for years finally found their way to the surface. I didn't know what to do with myself. The house felt enormous. Mark's absence wasn't just physical, it was everything. The silence echoed around me, and every corner of our home felt like a reminder of how I had failed, how I had let myself be nothing but a backdrop. I couldn't even bring myself to open the blinds or answer the phone. All I did was lie on the couch, staring at the ceiling, letting the sorrow consume me. The worst part was the crushing loneliness. I had spent so many years with Mark, believing that together, we had built something important. He was my anchor, my companion, my person. But now, I was just alone. And it was in that silence, in those long days, that I allowed myself to feel anger for the first time in years. I had been angry before. Sure, angry at my family for always putting me in the background. Angry at Mark for not seeing me for who I truly was. But this was different. This was the kind of rage that tore through every fiber of my being. How could I have let this happen? How could I have given so much and gotten nothing in return? The anger wasn't just at Mark. It was at myself, too, for letting it go on for so long, for never standing up for myself when it mattered, for letting myself be treated like I was insignificant. I had spent so much of my life trying to make everyone else happy, trying to make sure everyone else succeeded, while I quietly withered away in the corner. I had been the one who always picked up the slack, the one who quietly made sure everything worked out. While my brothers were praised and Mark was celebrated, I had played my role in the background, always making sure the picture was perfect for everyone else except for me. That night, I lay there thinking about everything. I thought about how I had been overlooked as a child, how my father had always told me I wasn't good enough. I thought about how, when I was a teenager, my mother had praised my brother's achievements while quietly dismissing mine. I was always the dutiful one, the quiet one, the one who took care of everything without asking for anything in return. I was never the star. And here I was, once again, pushed aside for someone younger, more exciting, and more worthy than me. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this happen? The tears that had started as a quiet stream soon became uncontrollable sobs, each one a release of all the years I had spent trying to please people who didn't even care. I cried for the loss of my father, for the loss of my marriage, and for the loss of who I thought I was. I had allowed myself to believe that my worth was tied to what others thought of me, tied to being there for everyone else, to being the reliable one, the supportive one. But no one had ever stopped to ask if I was okay, if I was seen, if I was valued. But somewhere, in the depth of my despair, a small spark of clarity began to form. It wasn't the clarity I had expected. It wasn't a sudden realization that everything would be fine and I would just move on. No, it was something more profound, something more painful. I realized that I had spent too many years sacrificing myself. For what? For people who didn't even appreciate it. For a marriage that wasn't really a partnership. For a family that had never truly seen me for who I was. No, I was done with this life, done with this version of me. One morning, I woke up and I made a decision. I wasn't going to live like this anymore. I wasn't going to stay in a house that reminded me of all the things I had lost, all the things I had given up. I packed my things, my clothes, a few books, and some pictures, and I sold everything. I didn't want to look back at the life I had built with Mark. It had never been my life. It had always been for him, for them, but never for me. I sold the house, the car, everything. I took what little money I had left, and I moved into a small apartment in a part of town I had never dared to explore before. It wasn't fancy, far from it, but it was mine. It was a space where I could breathe again, a space where I could start over. No one could take that away from me, not Mark, not my father, and not anyone who had ever made me feel small. I moved into that apartment not for Mark, not to prove anything to anyone else. I did it for me. I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of starting over, of living a life that wasn't defined by other people's expectations or judgments. I needed to see if I could be someone who existed for herself, someone who wasn't just a shadow to be cast aside when no longer needed. At first, it was hard, it was quiet, and the loneliness crept in again. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't trying to escape from the silence. I was learning to live with it. I started doing things I had always wanted to do but had never had the time for. I took up painting again, something I had loved as a child but had set aside in favor of being the perfect wife, the perfect daughter. I began reading books I had put off for years. I spent time with friends I had neglected, rekindling relationships I had left to rot because I had been too busy being everything for everyone else. And for the first time in my life, I felt the faintest glimmer of peace. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but I had taken the first step toward reclaiming who I was. The pain was still there, buried under the surface, but it was becoming more bearable. I wasn't going to let it define me anymore. I had done what I should have done a long time ago. I had chosen me. It had been a few months since I'd moved into the small apartment, a time filled with reflection, growth, and, most importantly, self-discovery. I had thrown myself into my work, into the company I had started, into my passions that I had put on hold for so long. At first, it felt like I was treading water, barely keeping my head above the surface, but eventually, I gained traction. The small investment firm I had launched was slowly picking up steam. I had built a strong portfolio, and in just 6 months, my firm had made a $20 million profit. I remember feeling a deep sense of pride when I saw the numbers. They weren't impressive in comparison to Mark's billions, but to me, they represented something far more valuable: my independence. This wasn't Mark's success. This wasn't something built off the foundation of his empire. This was mine. I had created it from scratch, with my own hands, with my own decisions, with my own vision. And then, one evening, as I was reviewing the reports for the day, I received a phone call. It was from Mark. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. The last time we spoke, he had been dismissive, and I hadn't heard from him in months. His voice, when it came through the phone, was completely different than I remembered. It was small, unsure, almost vulnerable. "Victoria," he began, his voice carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. "I've been following your progress, and I need to talk to you. I was wrong about everything." The words didn't make sense at first. Wrong. About everything, I couldn't process what he was saying. He had left me for someone else, for a younger, better version of what he thought he wanted. And now he was telling me he was wrong. The anger I had buried deep inside me for months bubbled to the surface, but I stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. "I've seen what you've built. I've been watching. You've done something incredible. Victoria, I was blind. I never saw you for who you really are," Mark said. His words felt strange, like a distant echo of the man I once knew. I stayed silent, letting the words sink in. His apology felt hollow, like a piece of clothing that had been worn too much, stretched out of shape. I want you back. Victoria, I was foolish. I thought I could find someone else. Someone younger. Someone more exciting. But now I see I was wrong. You were always the one. You were the one who was capable, the one who was smart, the one who made me better. And I failed you. His words hit me like a sledgehammer. The man who had discarded me so easily, the man who had never seen me for what I was now begging me to come back. But something inside me snapped. I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to being the person I had been. I couldn't let myself fall into that trap again. I had spent years building a life around someone else, always at the mercy of his needs, always prioritizing his success over my own. But now I was finally free. I had my own identity, my own success, and I had worked too hard to let it all slip away. But before I could respond, before I could say anything at all, something unexpected happened. "Mom!" A voice piped up from the doorway. I turned to see my son, Noah, standing there. He was only 9, but the look in his eyes was sharp, like he understood far more than a child his age should. He had been quiet throughout my entire conversation with Mark, but now it seemed like he had something he needed to say. I looked at him, confused. "What's wrong, Noah?" He hesitated for a moment, his small hands clutching the edge of the doorframe. Then, with the seriousness only a child could muster, he walked over to me, his gaze never wavering. "Mom," he said again, his voice stronger this time, "I'm tired of you letting him treat you like this, like you don't matter." I froze. The words pierced me deeper than anything Mark had just said. I looked at my son, searching his face for any sign of confusion, any sign that this was just a moment of childish outburst. But there was none. Noah was dead serious. Mark, on the other hand, had gone completely silent on the other end of the phone. I could hear him breathing heavily, but he didn't say anything. I could sense the tension between us growing. Noah looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "You deserve someone who sees you, Mom, someone who loves you for who you are, not for what you do for them, not for what you can give them. You're a hero. Mom, you make everything better." Tears filled my eyes as I knelt down to his level. His words struck me more than anything Mark had ever said. It was like hearing a truth I had buried deep inside for so long, a truth I had refused to acknowledge because it was too painful. My son, the one person who had always seen me as I was, had just given me the clarity I needed. I turned back to Mark, my voice steady. "I don't need your validation. Mark, I don't need your approval. I've already proven to myself that I am enough. I've built something of my own, something that's mine, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the woman I've become." Mark's voice came through the phone, quieter now, almost apologetic. "Victoria, please, don't let this go. I can't undo the past, but I can make things right. I was wrong about everything." I shook my head. "It's too late. Mark, you can't undo the hurt. You can't erase what you did." And with that, I ended the call. There was no point in continuing. The man I had loved, the man I had thought I would spend my life with, was still trapped in his own ego, in his own need for validation, but I wasn't, not anymore. Noah walked over to me and wrapped his small arms around me. "I'm proud of you. Mom?" I smiled, tears falling freely now, for the first time in a long time. I felt like I mattered. I wasn't the afterthought, the background figure anymore. I was the one who had built something from nothing, and I was the one who had the strength to move on. The phone call from Mark, the apology. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Noah, my son, saw me for who I truly was. Someone worthy of respect, someone capable of greatness, and that was all I needed. I didn't need Mark's approval. I didn't need anyone else's. I had finally found my own worth. I sat in the living room of my new apartment, staring at the phone in my hand. Mark's call had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. But I knew I had to confront him. This was it. This was the moment where I had to set the boundaries that I had been so afraid to establish before. My entire life, I had been afraid of standing up for myself, of saying no, of demanding respect, but not anymore. I wasn't the same woman who had silently stood by while everyone else walked all over her. I had worked too hard, come too far, to go back to the person I once was. I took a deep breath and dialed Mark's number. The phone rang once, twice, and then he answered. "Victoria," he said, his voice still carrying that familiar tone of uncertainty. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said, and I want you to know that I see the woman you've become. I was wrong to leave you." I could hear the regret in his voice, but I wasn't fooled. I had spent years trying to convince myself that I mattered to him, that he saw me as more than just an accessory to his life. But now, I could see the truth. Mark wasn't asking for forgiveness because he had learned from his mistakes. He was asking because he had seen my success. He had seen the business I had built, the life I had created without him. And now, he wanted back in. "Mark," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You can't just come back into my life because you see that I'm successful now. You left me when I needed you the most. You didn't care when I was struggling. You didn't care when I was crying alone at night, wondering what was wrong with me. And now, because you see that I've built something, you think you can just come back and rewrite the past. That's not how this works." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him swallowing, trying to find the right words. But I wasn't going to let him manipulate me this time. I had spent far too many years justifying his actions, forgiving his transgressions, and convincing myself that I didn't deserve better. I wasn't doing that anymore. "You're not the reason I became successful, Mark," I continued, my words growing stronger with each sentence. "I did that for me. I did that because I realized that I'm worth more than the person I used to be. I'm worth more than the woman who stood behind you, making sure your needs were always met while I was forgotten. I'm worth more than the woman who allowed herself to be invisible for so long." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I spoke. It was a strange mix of anger and relief, of power and vulnerability. For so long, I had been silent. But now, the silence was broken. "I'm not going to keep living in the shadows, Mark. I'm not going to keep pretending that I don't matter. You don't get to come back into my life because it suits you now. You don't get to pretend that your abandonment didn't hurt me, that you didn't break me." I paused for a moment, letting my words hang in the air. Mark didn't respond right away, and for the first time, I wasn't sure what to expect. Was he going to beg me to take him back? Was he going to guilt me into believing that I needed him? I waited, but instead of the apology I had expected, there was silence. "Victoria," he finally said, his voice softer now. "I'm sorry. I know I hurt you. But what do you want me to do? I can't change the past. I can't go back and fix what I've done." "You can't fix the past, Mark," I replied, my voice calm but resolute. "But you can start respecting me. You can start seeing me for who I am, not just as someone who's useful to you. And if you think that just because I'm successful now, you can waltz back in and claim a place in my life, you're wrong. I don't need you. I never needed you to define me, and I'm certainly not going to let you use me again." There was another long silence, and I could feel the weight of his words as they sank in. Mark had always been the one who held the power in our relationship, always the one who set the terms. But now, the tables had turned. For the first time, I wasn't the one seeking his approval. I wasn't the one begging for his love or validation. I had already given that to myself. "I understand," Mark said quietly. "I can't undo the past. But I never should have treated you the way I did. I was selfish. And I was wrong. I see that now. But I don't know what to say. Victoria, I don't know how to fix things." "You don't have to fix anything, Mark," I said firmly. "You don't have to fix anything. Because I'm not broken anymore. I'm not the woman you left behind. I'm someone else now. And if you can't accept that, then you need to stay out of my life. For a moment, there was only silence. I could feel the tension between us, the weight of the years of hurt and disappointment. But there was also something else, something lighter. It was the freedom of knowing that I wasn't chained to him anymore, that I didn't have to endure his apologies or his manipulations. I had finally learned to set boundaries, to say no, and to walk away from people who didn't treat me with respect. "I'm sorry," Mark said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I understand." I hung up the phone without another word, feeling a strange sense of closure. The man who had once been my world was no longer the center of my life. And as I sat there, in my small apartment, I realized something that filled me with a sense of pride. I had finally learned my worth. In the days that followed, the people around me began to see the changes. My family, for the first time, started treating me differently. They no longer saw me as the quiet, invisible sister. They started to recognize the woman I had become, the woman who had built something of her own, who had learned to stand up for herself. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of discomfort, but I no longer cared. I had set the boundaries, and I wasn't going to let anyone cross them. As for Mark, he faded into the background of my life, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. As I ended the call with Mark, I felt a profound silence settle over me. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but one that was filled with clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't searching for approval from anyone. I wasn't looking for validation from the man who had once been the center of my world. Nor was I seeking the acceptance of a family who had always seen me as the reliable, invisible one. I had finally understood something crucial about myself. I didn't need anyone else to define my worth. I had already done that for myself. Walking away from that conversation, I realized that the journey I had been on wasn't just about rebuilding my career or making a name for myself in the business world. It was about rediscovering who I was, who I had always been, but had been too afraid to acknowledge. I had spent so much of my life trying to be the person others wanted me to be. I had lived for their expectations, their praise, and their approval. I was always the one who took care of things, the one who stepped aside so others could shine, the one who put herself last. But now, I had made a choice to live for myself, a choice to stop seeking validation from anyone who couldn't see my value. I didn't need Mark's apology, my family's recognition, or anyone else's approval to know that I was enough. I had already proven that to myself. The more I thought about it, the more I understood the deeper truth that had been buried inside me for so long. True happiness doesn't come from external validation. It doesn't come from the praise of others or the approval of the people you love. It comes from within. It comes from the quiet confidence of knowing who you are, regardless of what anyone else thinks. It comes from the strength to set boundaries, to walk away from situations and people that no longer serve you, and to stand tall in your own worth. But as I sat there in the calm of my apartment, the quiet hum of the city outside, a thought lingered in my mind. How many of us go through life waiting for someone else to tell us we're enough? How many of us live in the shadows, afraid to step into the light because we're not sure if we're worthy of it? How many of us sacrifice our own happiness, our own dreams, just to be accepted by others? The truth is, we all do it at some point. We all seek approval from others, whether it's from our families, our friends, or even strangers. It's human nature to want to belong, to be seen, to be loved. But somewhere along the way, we forget that the most important approval we need is our own. We forget that we are worthy, just as we are, without having to prove ourselves to anyone. And that's where the real power lies, the power to say, "I am enough," to stop asking for permission to be who you are, and instead, start living fully and unapologetically. The moment you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to shine is the moment you truly begin to live. So, now I ask you, what is your worth? How much of yourself do you sacrifice for the people around you? And when do you stop living for others and start living for you? Take a moment to reflect. If you had to rebuild your life from scratch, what would you do differently? Would you continue to wait for someone to recognize your worth? Or would you choose to find it on your own? Would you keep sacrificing your own happiness to make others comfortable? Or would you choose to live authentically, on your own terms? These are the questions that I've had to face, and I encourage you to ask yourself the same, because in the end, the only person whose opinion truly matters is your own. You are the one who gets to define your worth. You are the one who gets to decide what kind of life you want to live. And when you stop living for everyone else, you finally make space to live for yourself. The truth is, we are all deserving of love, success, and happiness, not because we've earned it through others' approval, but because we are inherently worthy of it. And once we realize that, everything changes. So, what's your answer? Will you continue to wait for someone else to see your worth, or will you find it within yourself?